Hi, everybody. I'm sorry I can't be in class. As you may have heard, COVID has hit our house, and Sam is positive. Oscar is quarantined, and I have some symptoms, although I have tested negative, so I have to be staying home. So I did want to make sure that we didn't get too far behind in class, and so I want to go through some things with you and try and keep us on track. So today we're going to talk about research studies, and we're going to apply the things that you learned yesterday in your reading, and see how those apply to research studies and what you kind of need to be looking for. So when I read a research study, and this is something I've had to do quite a bit, especially when I went to get my master's in counseling, any of my master's classes that I've taken. And as you, depending upon what area you go in to study when you are in college, you may have to read a lot of research studies. When you do research projects, they're not okay with you just looking up some magazine article online. They want you to get into research. And so I want you to be familiar with research studies so that you can hopefully kind of glide easily into that when you get into those in college. If you're in stats, or if you've taken stats in the past, or if you plan to take stats in the future, you'll be looking at research studies in that course as well. So one of the first things you're going to want to look at is you're going to want to look at the type of research that they're describing, or that they're focusing on in the research study. The first kind is descriptive. So descriptive is exactly how it is termed. You describe something and you're looking at it from all different angles. Correlational looks at relationships between variables, so relationships between two different things. So if there's an increase in one, is there an increase in the other? If there's a decrease in one, is there a decrease in the other? What type of relationship is there between those two things? And then experimental looks at causes in relationships between variables. So we're going to get into those a little bit more. When we talk about descriptive research starts with, could be just observation. It could be in the lab, in the field, which means in the natural environment. When I think of field research, and this isn't necessarily psychological research, but I always think of Jane Goodall. She is the lady that went into the jungles and observed gorillas in their natural habitat. So she didn't interfere with them at all. She just wanted to see how they behave. That was a piece of observational research. Lab research, you try to set up the natural habitat as best as you can, but if you want to be able to manipulate certain things, then you might put them in a lab to be able to observe those. So if you want to observe, if I wanted to create a lab, I might put you guys in a classroom, and I might turn the heat up because I want to observe how you behave in a really, really warm environment, and I might observe things like how focused you are, how much time you're spending on task, how much time you're spending not on task, things like that. The second type are surveys and interviews. Surveys and interviews we have to be careful about. These usually come through questionnaires of some type. And it might be a paper pencil survey, it might be an interview where someone is asking questions. But we have to be very careful because people don't always tell the truth. And sometimes they like to skew results on purpose. My best example of this is every so many years we do what's called the Iowa Youth Survey. And I remember several years ago doing this when I was the counselor. And so you usually have 6th graders, 8th graders, and 11th graders fill this out. And then when you get the information back, it's broken down into grade level. And I believe one year, and this was when we were still just Prairie Valley, we had like 5 8th graders who said they, smoked crack cocaine every day, which I knew was not the case. It's very obvious that was just somebody trying to skew the results. It'd be funny. So you always have to be careful with questionnaires, especially if it's a personal interview and the person might be trying to please the person who's interviewing them. So, or they may want to make themselves feel more impressive. So if I say, like, how often do you read? And you feel like, well, if I tell them I never read, they're going to think that I'm dumb. You might say, oh, I read like every day. So you always have to be careful with those. The last one is case studies. Case studies are an in-depth look at an individual. Again, these are ones you have to be careful of. Case studies cannot be replicated. So it's usually looking at one individual and their experience. And it's not often something that you plan ahead. Case studies can be something you discover and you decide to study. So I think the best way to explain this is the case study of little Jeannie. Jeannie was a girl who was discovered when she was 12 or 13 years old, and this was back in the 60s or 70s. Her parents had basically locked her in a room in their home and had not interacted with her at all. They gave her food. She had a bucket to use to go to the bathroom, but they never spoke to her. And so when she was discovered at age 12 or 13, she had no verbal skills. She couldn't speak. She had no language skills at all. And so the case study was very interesting because they were able to look at how she learned language after that point and be able to study parts of the brain and how they were affected, whether we had opportunities within our brain to learn things at certain times, and those opportunities may be closed at a later time. Jeannie never did regain full normal language skills like someone that would normally be her age, that had a normal life. And so they learned a lot from her. However, nobody would ever want to put someone in a situation like hers to replicate that study. That would be cruel. And we're going to talk about ethics in a couple days, and nobody's going to do that. Even if you find other children who are in similar situations, their experiences are going to be different, so it can't be replicated exactly. So case studies are important, and a lot of times they can be a springboard from other things or to other studies that we might have, but a lot of times they're not something that we can base a lot of theories on. Okay, so correlational research is the next type. And if you remember anything from what I say today, remember this: correlation does not imply causation. Correlation does not imply causation. So we look at two variables and we look at how they change together, but we can't say for sure that one is causing the other thing. Here's an example of that. And I am so disappointed. I clicked on the link on this screen and that site happens to be down right now. I don't know when it will come back up, but if it ever does, it's very funny. So some things that they found, and they've looked at some different studies, and they create these line graphs. So the line graphs of one of the examples was purchases of butter. Okay, so they go through the different years and they go through the purchases of butter, and it's going here, and oh, this year it goes up, and this year, oh, less butter, and so you see the line graph, right? And then they compare them to other line graphs of other things that happen, and they find these correlations because when one goes up, another one goes up, or when one goes down, another goes down. But they're so completely unrelated to show you that just because things correlate, that doesn't mean one causes the other. And so the example with butter is something they found that correlates with purchases of butter are divorce rates. And so when people purchase, the same time people purchase more butter, this is the same time that divorce rates go up. And when people purchase less butter, divorce rates go down. It's just, there can be no connection. There can be no causation between that. Butter purchases don't cause divorces. Divorces don't cause people to buy more butter, and yet there's a correlation there. So that's a good example of that. Again, those are important studies because they can springboard into other things where we can start looking at causation. Okay, so these things do have a relationship. Now let's look at why that is. Longitudinal design can help with that. It can suggest causal relationships because those are that's research that can happen over a long period of time. So we can see not just a small picture, but something larger. So we can maybe make some of those assumptions that we can then test later. Okay, experimental research is the third area. Now, hopefully you have gone through this in other classes, and this is just a review. So in experimental research, you have independent variables. That is the one that is manipulated for the experimental factor. Dependent variables change in response to changes in the independent variable, and then the control group that does not experience the independent variable. So, example. I am going to study how students react to temperature in a classroom. Okay, so today I'm going to come into the classroom and I'm going to turn the heat up. It's going to be 85 degrees in our classroom. That is going to be my independent variable, the temperature, because I'm changing it. I'm manipulating that. I'm determining what that temperature is going to be. The dependent variable is going to be your behavior, how you react. And so maybe I'm going to measure that by, I'm going to give you a test or a quiz. And on that quiz, I'm going to see what your responses are. If you do well, if you don't do well. That's going to be dependent upon the temperature in the room. Okay, and then maybe the next day I'm going to come in and I'm going to make it really, really cold, and I'm going to give you another test. I'm going to see what your scores are on that test as well. I'm going to be able to compare those. I'm going to be able to look at those. But still, the independent variable is going to be the temperature in the room because that's what I'm changing. The dependent variable is going to be your scores on the test. That's going to depend on the independent variable or the changes. Now I want to see if this really does have to do with the temperature in the room, or if there are other factors that are making a difference. So I'm going to have a control group. So I'm going to have a group come in, and so my experimental group is going to have a room that's 85 degrees and 55 degrees, and my control group is going to have a room that is stays the same, 68 degrees, what we would consider a normal temperature in a classroom. I don't know if that's a normal temperature or not, but it seems like it. So that's my control group. They're not going to experience the independent variable at all. I'm not going to change the temperature on them. I'm just going to give them the test, and we're going to see how they do. And so if they remain consistent and the other classes have a big variation in what they're doing, then I'm going to know that there's some type of effect there. Okay, so this is our last slide, other important terms that I want you to know. But before we do that, I do want to give you a code word just to make sure you're watching the video. Everybody can thank Ms. Walker for this. She gave me the idea because I was worried that maybe you guys wouldn't watch the video. So the code word for today is going to be turkey, because we canceled Thanksgiving at my house because of COVID, and all I can think about is I'm not getting turkey this year. So we're going to say the code word is turkey. All right, other important terms, bias. Everybody has bias. Everybody has a certain feeling, something they feel one way or the other. They are more inclined to something. We tend to be drawn to things that match what we think. So we have to be very careful that that bias doesn't influence the results of our study. So let's just say that I'm doing a study and I really, I'm one of those people, I can't handle being cold at all. I can't deal with it very well. And so I'm biased in that I think that's going to affect people more than being really, really warm. And so, maybe unwittingly, unknowingly, that bias could influence my results. So I have to be extra careful to make sure that everything is done in a way that bias can't seep in. Placebo effect. Placebo effect is when a participant's expectations produce the outcome. So you come in and you know that I'm doing a study, you know that I'm turning the heat way up. And so you're like, it's hot in here. There's no way I'm going to do well on this because she turned the heat up. So now your expectations that you're not going to do well are going to produce that outcome. This is probably most common in drug studies. So people get pills and they want to see what the effects of the pills are, the side effects of the pills. Some people just by taking it are like, oh, I feel so much better from taking that pill. Later they find out the pill is just a sugar pill. So blind studies, that's when a participant doesn't know if they're experimental or they're in the control group. So again, the pill studies, I'm giving you a medication, but you don't know if it's the real one or if it's just a sugar pill. You have no idea. And so it kind of takes that placebo effect away. So now, because you don't know if it's real or not, and you know that there are some fake ones out there, then you're going to be paying more attention to the actual side effects and the actual results of that medication. Double-blind studies are the same. The people taking the medication don't know, but in addition, the people giving the pills don't know. Obviously, somebody does, but the people dealing directly with those research subjects don't know, so that their bias can't enter the picture. I really want this, hey, right now we're working on vaccines for COVID, right? Really, really want this to work. I really, really want this to be what is going to help people. And so maybe I'm going to be pushing it a little bit and making some assumptions and some observations within my bias to move it along faster. If you have a double-blind study, that's not necessarily going to be the case. So hopefully that kind of gave you some enlightenment on some of the stuff that we talked or that you learned about yesterday or you read about yesterday. For today, I actually have posted a research study that I would like you to read through. Now, two things about this. One, this is going to be hard. So don't get in there and go, gosh, this is, I don't know, maybe I'm missing something. It's hard. So know that going into it. It's going to be difficult. I've tried to make it so that you can get through it and you can manage it, especially since I'm not going to be there. Second of all, I don't expect you to read that research study word for word. I've never read a research study word for word. There are a lot of mathematical things in the middle, which if you're in stat, you may be like, hey, yeah, this is interesting. We've learned about this. That's not what we're going to be looking at. I'm wanting you to look at keywords or look for keywords within the case study that we've discussed. And so I'm giving you the case study, and I'm also giving you a Google form with about 5 or 6 questions on it. And in those questions, you're going to just find those different things and be able to identify things like what kind of research is it. And it states it in there very clearly. So I'm not trying to set you up for failure here. So this will be the second grade for the class. So the last one, the first one was the reflection. That was due yesterday. This is due tomorrow. And we will be moving forward tomorrow with some more talk about research, some more talk about ethics. We're going to actually go forward into ethics tomorrow, and I've got a project for you to do. And I'm still going to think about how we're going to get that done virtually. So, okay, so if you have any questions, again, please email me. Otherwise, hopefully everything is going fine, and I will see you soon.